just recognize who's here. Looks like we have everybody with Mr. Robinson joining us via WebEx. First item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the February 2nd, 2021 meeting. I would entertain a motion. Motion by Herb, second by Jean. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Jean.
We had quite a discussion in the minutes on the
Mr.
lead service line issue, and I don't see it on the agenda for today's report. Are we going to talk about that at all, Eric?
I didn't have anything prepared for today,
Okay.
Jim. You know, as far as kind of the different approaches that we had talked about at the last meeting and moving that forward, I didn't have anything prepared for today, so I didn't put it on the agenda today.
So is there well, I don't mean to take up an issue here in the minutes approval process, but just a question. I'll ask a question when you have your report.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jean. Can you turn your mic on? Thank you.
Under item 2, last line, I talked to Michelle. I think she'll work that out. It's nothing major. I think I asked the question about an update on well 3 in the pending letter from the EPA, but I certainly didn't offer that a pending letter was coming through, because I wouldn't have had knowledge of that.
Okay.
Okay.
So
We
it can be administrative thing that can be.
Yeah,
resolved.
housekeeping, we can get that. Any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, I guess all those in favor can signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously, thank you. Moving on to our director's report, I'll pass that over to Mr. Lindman.
Yeah, so there's a number of items on there. You know, for both water and the wastewater, I guess we have some new employees we'd like to recognize. One of them is here with us today as well. So, Gina, hey, welcome aboard. Yeah. And then if the commissioners have any questions based on the write-ups, would like any further details on what happened at the wastewater plant, or, you know, we'd be certainly willing to walk you through those as well.
I guess, Eric, what is the status at the wastewater plant? Are we completely cleaned up?
No, we're not. Dave, you want to give where we're at?
I thought we made really great progress that first week. We were pretty much working day and night, but so we got the water pumped out and pretty much got the sludge pushed out. There's still corners and back rooms that need to be cleaned up some. And then there were issues with the insurance company. So then that kind of bogged things down a bit. And so I'm hopeful that we'll get started maybe even tomorrow on finishing up those last details. One of the questions was whether the contractor was responsible for his equipment. And it's my understanding now that he is, and they are moving their equipment out. And that was one of the big things we were trying to figure out how to do to lift that out. But Myron Construction certainly has capabilities to probably best do that anyway.
They were responsible for what?
So we basically flooded our basements when the seal failed on
Yes.
that digester. And in our new building, our 770 building, that basement floor level is lower than the other buildings. And they're all connected by a tunnel, the 4 structures that we're referring to. And so we filled that to a height of about 4 feet. And so they had a number of, I think, 6 scissor lifts down there. And they were all flooded in sludge. And so there was some discussion. Everybody was waiting for their insurance company to approve for them to do something.
They weren't responsible for the leak.
They weren't responsible for the leak, no.
Were there any odor problems in the neighborhood associated with that?
You know, sometimes I'm self-conscious. Maybe I bring odors with me I don't realize. But no, it didn't, you know, it wasn't a particular problem.
Good.
There is some odor at the wastewater plant, but we were concerned about safety issues with gases and potentially electricity and whatnot, but we didn't have any issues, and but it was certainly something to be aware of.
Okay.
So.
Any other, Mr. Jean?
Did we get the screening conveyor, auger, or whatever fixed?
We did. Brad Wentland is one of our, we've got good employees, but he, give him a big challenge and he'll get it rolling. So he drove the other day to Minnesota and picked up some replacement auger and got it put in yesterday. He had to do some welding and they had to get it configured. So it's, I don't think we're guaranteeing it for any certain number of years, but he has it back in operation. So,
Okay. Is there any other discussion?
I just wonder what the status of our request for funding for lateral line replacement. Any news on that front?
We're working through some last documents for the environmental review. As far as the funding, I don't know, Scott, if they said when we were going to get that or not, or that it was going to be this spring. I just don't know if we have a date yet.
No date was set. The last email I received from DNR stated that they were having more issues than what they considered initially rolling out the funds and implementing the program. They did indicate that we would be receiving the $450,000 that we requested, but didn't know when and what was all going to be required to receive those funds.
So at least we know what the number is.
Correct.
I did have one more question. In view of what's gone on in Texas with the water plants, how prepared are we for a complete electrical washout like they had there as far as our water plant is concerned? Let's say we had a tornado that came through in June or July and wiped out our electrical power here for several days.
We're in a lot better spot or better situated than what they are or were for that kind of issue. There's a couple items that we're still working on, and we're going to be addressing a lot of those with our new facility and our improvements with the new facility. There's a couple of shortfalls that are budgeted beyond that in the next couple of years, so we should be sitting really well and have not much not much reliance on the grid. I would say probably no reliance within 3 years.
But today we would still have some.
We would have issues that would require us to take temporary generators or portable generators to sites to sustain operations.
Are those on hand?
They are.
Okay.
We have portable generators and would have to take those to our lift stations.
Yes.
We could be challenged to keep up with things if we had no electricity across the whole city, especially if trees were down or roads were particularly icy or we had issues like that. Sometimes when we have storm events, though, then the flow also decreases. And so, yeah, we've got the same. We've got 2 larger backup generators. The wastewater plant upgrade includes upgrading the generator system for the plant. So we have a plan, but in our experience, if we lose a number of lift stations, it would be a challenge to keep everything.
Has that ever happened, Dave?
We had an incident, but kind of what I'm basing it on, 8-10 years ago. We're on the northeast side of town. We lost several different lift stations.
Yes.
And so then that was kind of the thing, just keeping up with those with the crew we had available on hand after hours. I was glad that it wasn't the whole city. Since that time, we've acquired a second portable generator. And so we also have added some staff. So we sure try to keep up, but like I said, it could be a challenge.
How much do those portable generators cost?
I think we have one big one that can basically run anything, and then a slightly smaller one that can run 75% of the lift stations. And I think that smaller one was in the $35,000 range, if I remember right.
Do we ever do, I guess it's risk analysis, do we ever do any, on-paper analysis of what we would do if a certain event took place?
To some extent, we maybe did that with our facilities plan, but no, I think we could spend more time on that.
Okay.
So,
I think we are working with the county, started this year that the mayor initiated an emergency response plan, which will incorporate water, wastewater, and those types of things. So that's a little bit broader scale, but it is being looked at over the, period of time coming up, so.
Okay.
On the water side, we are also working with Clark Dietz right now, updating EPA mandated risk and resiliency.
Yes, I know that exists
Yeah,
there.
so we're probably 3/4 of the way through
Good.
that right now.
That's very prudent activity. Thanks.
On that topic, do we participate in any tabletop exercises doing emergency planning?
That is part of the contract or the agreement that we had with emergency management, so expect that to happen at some point here. I know we were a little bit more aggressive about what we wanted than the county was ready for, but we're ready to do it. Any more discussion about the director's report? Anything you want to highlight that we didn't touch on? All right, I think we're ready to move on to the presentation and project update for the Inflow Infiltration Study by Strand and Associates. I would welcome you to the podium.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hope you all are doing well. Like you mentioned, we're with Strand Associates, and we're going to be presenting the conclusions and the results of the I&I study that we conducted over the past several months, year and a half. I'm supposed to just give you the cue, I guess, when we're on to the next one?
Yes, we have our amazing people
Okay.
here. They'll keep up with this.
Want me to wave or dance, or?
If that's how
Okay.
you want to do it, that's fine with me.
We'll skip the dance, I'll go with a wave. So today specifically, we're going to be talking about the infiltration and inflow analysis and how that summarizes the city's baseline for your existing dry and wet weather flows in your sanitary sewer system. With me today is Ryan Yentz. Ryan was the lead project engineer on the project. I was the project manager and provided quality control. So this was really the lion's share of who worked on this project recently. Okay. So the key here is that reducing the II in your system is the key to the city's operation and maintenance success, from the collection system in the streets all the way to the treatment plant. The graphic kind of shows the layout of your sanitary sewer system. And reducing II has several benefits. It reduces SSOs, the incident of SSOs, and for that matter, water in the basements. Water in the basement isn't always caused by wet weather, but at times it is. It reduces sinkholes in the streets that might be associated with defects in the collection system that allow sinkholes to form. It certainly reduces pumping and chemical costs when you can reduce your II. And if you reduce the II, you have more capacity in your system, and it increases the capacity that you might have for future development within the city. I think we missed one there. No? Okay, I was going to touch briefly on II sources. Maybe that's, okay. All right, sorry, this is just a wee bit out of order. I just wanted to basically give you a real big overview, kind of a big picture on II, where it enters a collection system. It has the potential to enter in several locations. A big one is vented covers or open pick holes. If water ponds in the streets, it can easily get into the collection system. Down in the manholes, you've got joints, steps, service connections. Those are all potential II sources. And then down in the system, the pipes themselves, again, you have joints, you can have service connections, cracked pipe. So that's just kind of a real broad look at where might this extraneous water get into our system. And with that, Ryan is going to kind of walk you through the specifics of the project. If you could go back to the previous slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So the flow metering that we conducted this past summer, that collects sound quality data to evaluate your dry and your wet weather flow patterns. The two pieces of equipment shown on this slide are the flow meter itself, which has a transducer which records the level and the velocity in the sewer. And then we also had a tipping bucket style rain gauge to collect time-sensitive rainfall data throughout the study. The chart and graphic in the center of the slide shows a typical flow graph, which we're trying to recreate in the city sewer. And there are kind of four components to that graph that we'll talk about. The yellow portion includes the sanitary sewer itself. In a utopian world, that would be the only flow that would be conveyed to the treatment plant. The The red area above the sanitary area is the I&I, the inflow and infiltration. The sharp peak, the steepest point of the red II graph represents the inflow, and then the tailed off end is the infiltration. Inevitably, you're probably going to have some sort of groundwater infiltration, which is the bottom portion of the graph, which is groundwater that's going to get into your pipes unless they're perfectly sealed. And then lastly, coming from the top portion of the graph is the rainfall. And that kind of shows the response to that wet weather event. And the last picture is just a picture of just how that flow metering equipment is installed in one of the sanitary sewer manholes. So the city collection system was divided into 15 drainage basins for a comprehensive analysis. The graphic shows a map of the city, and each different color represents a different drainage basin that was where everything that's shaded in one color flows to one particular point. The smaller red stars at the downstream end of each of the basins are where a flow meter was installed, and then there are also some blue raindrops, which is where a rain gauge was used. 2 of these rain gauges were installed by Strand, and the rest were monitored by Weather Underground. These 15 spots were chosen in conjunction with some city staff, visited sites to make sure that they were conducive to measuring accurate flow data. And these are monitored for 12 weeks. The block schematic in the top portion of the figure just shows how each of the meters are in relation to each other. So for example, the 3 darker purple shaded areas all independently flow into the furthest downstream light purple area, which would measure everything that's purple gets measured by that light purple area. Next. After the 12-week monitoring period, summary sheets were completed to provide valuable information on the wet weather flow. For each of the 15 flow meters, a 2-page summary sheet was created. This is an example of one of them. The summary sheet, the first page contains a kind of a blown up, zoomed in figure of what portion of the collection system the flow meter was measuring. That color coincides to the color on that larger figure that we had displayed earlier, along with some basic information about the site, what manhole it was, the pipe diameter, and the tributary area. The table on the other side of the slide contains a bunch of kind of nerdy engineering wet weather parameters, which is all included in the appendix of the report, which can be viewed if somebody is interested in it. But the report itself contains kind of a gleaned out version of those results. Next. The second page of each summary sheet that was provided for each of the flow meters contains a graphical representation of the 4 wet weather events, and this is trying to recreate that general flow curve that I had mentioned earlier. The flow meters are not able to measure that groundwater infiltration that I had measured, or that I had mentioned earlier, but the orange line, or the bottom line of the 4 graphs from each of the flow meters is from a dry weather period in the city, where a time where we took about 2 separate weeks that you guys didn't have any rain or minimal rain, to hopefully have a strong base flow to compare to. And then during 4 periods of wet weather, the blue line indicates the response. Now the gray line on these graphs that come from the bottom, or come from the top, excuse me, that is the time-sensitive rainfall information. And we chose this sheet as an example because this particular basin shows a very strong response. When it rains, your flows spike pretty significantly. Next slide. Just to give you an example of an area of the city that that didn't have as much of a response, this is the entire southwest basin, which is shown in everything that's purple in the center graphic there. And you can see that the blue lines in the 4 graphs are fairly matched up with the orange lines, despite having some significant wet weather events, which just shows this is a newer part of the city, and is probably got a little bit tighter sanitary sewer infrastructure. It's going to be less susceptible to that II. So as I mentioned, we kind of gleaned out the important information from all of that data, and the flow metering results, they focus maintenance activities for 1.2 million feet of sewer infrastructure that's included in the city. The table shows each of the 15 meters with 3 important parameters. The first is a peak 15-minute wet weather flow, so this is the absolute peak flow that was observed during the monitoring period, along with a dry weather flow that was taken at the same time as that peak wet weather flow. So if it was at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday when the peak 15-minute wet weather flow was, ideally at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday during the dry weather period is the number shown in that 15-minute dry weather flow. And the ratio between that wet weather flow and the dry weather flow is called a peaking factor. And that gives you an idea of how severe that inflow is. Now, the map of the city collection system, these are each of the 15 basins and meters that we have been talking about, but now they changed colors to indicate how severe that peaking factor was. The 2 basins that are highlighted red have peaking factors of close to 14. Wisconsin DNR, if you're going to build a new subdivision or a new development area, they're going to require you guys to build and plan for a peaking factor of between 2.5 and 4 for new development. So a peaking factor of close to 14 is much more severe than that. Thanks. That kind of wrapped up all the flow metering side of things, but in addition to the flow metering, there were a few 4 Wausau specific investigations that result in additional opportunities for II removal. The first one that we'll talk about is the First Street access hatch assessment. This is a sanitary sewer that's located inside of a storm sewer. It used to be a combined sewer in the city on First Street. And the city hired an outside contractor to enter the storm sewer and observe these access hatches to see the condition of them. Another investigation was the Wisconsin river level analysis, and that was to show a strong correlation between the treatment plant inflow and flow and the height of the Wisconsin River. We performed a capacity analysis where that peak 15-minute wet weather flow of the meters was compared to the average downstream capacity of the gravity sewers downstream. And then we also did a bit of a analysis on the city's 26 lift stations and tried to do some of the similar wet weather parameters that we had calculated for the meters, but just in a more focused, usually smaller area that is tributary to the lift stations. Next. And finally, the recommendation summary provides the city an outline for future evaluations and capital improvements. The 3 steps to reducing II in the system. The first one is to identify the problem areas, and that was completed with this flow metering and II investigation. The second is to pinpoint specific II sources, and then lastly would be rehabilitation or replacement of some of that infrastructure to reduce the II. And then the table also on the slide documents, again, each of the 15 sewer basins, the priority of low, medium, and high, which coincides to the green, yellow, and red colors on the previous figure, along with recommendations and an engineer's estimate for a cost for those to pinpoint the specific II sources. In addition to that, we did also include a recommendation of installing a tipping bucket style rain gauge, similar to the temporary ones that we had in our study, but to install one of those permanently at the treatment plant to connect with the treatment plant SCADA system for more time-sensitive rainfall data. Next. So the first item on the recommendations side of thing for those two high-priority basins was smoke testing. And smoke testing efficiently locates sources of inflow to be removed. The smoke testing, what happens is you hook up some liquid smoke or simulated smoke, similar to what you'd see in a Halloween haunted house, and you hook that up to a fan over a sanitary sewer manhole, and that fan pushes smoke through a section of the sewer, and anywhere where the smoke can exit the system, water can enter the system. So a few of the pictures on this slide show smoke coming out of maybe a storm inlet or a lateral where lateral might be broken, or sometimes if a clean out cap is missing, it would come out of there as well. And the report kind of form that's filled out in the field is also shown on this slide, which just documents the defects, specific source, and gives the city direction on how to fix them and minimize the II into the system. Next. And the second component that we mentioned in our report is the manhole assessments, which provide another layer to the city's existing asset management practices. The city does a good job now of assessing and maintaining issues and defects in the sewer with its annual televising and cure-in-place pipe lining programs. But we recommended starting to include some work on the manhole side of things. We're going from left to right on the slides here. We have pictures, multiple photos of each of these manholes would be taken as part of the manhole assessments. And that facilitates future review from the computer. So Dave or any of the collection system folks can go back to their desk and look and have a better idea of what the condition of a manhole was instead of having to drive out to the location again in the city. One of the forms that's included in the assessment is specific rehab recommendations that would be provided for each manhole, again allowing kind of a turnkey approach for the city to then take that and either do it themselves. I know you guys do maybe some manhole grouting, or hiring a contractor to do those rehabilitation work. And then management of the assessments and rehab, that documents progress so that you guys can come to a Waterworks Commission and show, hey, we've spent X amount of dollars and we've gotten Y amount of manholes done. Hopefully you'd see a reduction of flows, or a reduction in flows would be expected after working on that. Next. In summary, the 2020 infiltration inflow analysis summarized the baseline for the city's existing dry and wet weather sanitary sewer flows. The flow metering collected sound quality data to evaluate dry and wet weather flow patterns. The flow metering results focused maintenance activities for the 1.2 million feet of sewer in the city. And then the Wausau specific investigations result in additional opportunities for II removal. And then the future activities that we recommended were smoke testing, manhole assessments, and collection system rehabilitation. With that, we'd open it up for any questions.
All right, if anybody has any questions. Yes, Mr. Jean.
The sanitary sewer on First Avenue, or First Street, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Was that, Dave, did you tell us that that was inspected previously? I wasn't aware of that.
They did, Ryan might be able to correct me, but they did do some inspection, and they made sure some of those covers on the inside of that storm sewer were secured to the top of the sanitary sewer. But there were other covers that they didn't mess with because they didn't want to open up a can of worms.
What? Okay. But is that secure in either, both your opinions? I couldn't tell from the data that in the report whether they were secure.
Well, so there were 6 access hatches in that stretch of sewer, and The contractor that did the entry to do the assessment, they were able to open 4 of the 6. The other 2 were grouted shut, what appeared to be by either city staff or a contractor in the past, and those were not opened, as they had looked like they had been kind of sealed shut. We talked with some city staff, or with city staff with Dave and Ryan Dwelly, about whether or not to seal the rest of them or not, and it appeared like having access to that sewer was critical.
Well, we rarely go in them, so. Just for your, I used to work for the city.
Yep.
And that interceptor separation, I think that was all done at the same time back in the late 30s. So it was part of the separation, I agree, but I'm pretty confident that storm and that inner pipe were built at the same time.
Okay.
Okay. The other question is on Sherman Street. We have a similar situation on Sherman.
Yes,
Were they inspected too?
that one was not inspected.
Okay. But that's part of the one district that we're concerned about.
Correct.
Okay. One other quick question, and I didn't look at the appendix information that I had from a draft report.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious of the timeline, like when I'll call it meter, it's on page 11 of your report now,
Okay.
meter ID 15, and obviously, there's a lot of flow coming out of that.
Yep. That's one of the basins that we were concerned about, correct?
There,
Yep.
and for good reason. But I'm kind of curious how that correlates with 14. So this is not the same timeline, I'm thinking, but maybe I can talk to you afterwards and
Sure.
better understand my question. Because I want to know when 1,700 gallons went through there, that's over 2/3 or 2/3 or 3/4 of 14's highest flow.
Okay.
So if we can look at the timeline, that might be of value to us,
Okay.
okay?
Yep, I understand.
And then the other observation, and I don't think it was in what we presented today, but in a report that I saw previously, I didn't think all the lift stations were listed. I think I counted 19 or 20, and I was specifically looking for the industrial park lift station, and it wasn't included. And that's the biggest lift station we have. It's off of Solana Railroad tracks, off
Yeah, I know it.
44th. Unless it's under 44th, or,
I'll have to look at that one. But I know the 2 lift stations that we were concerned about were Merrill Avenue and Northwestern, which are much smaller lift stations than industrial. I vaguely remember one of the lift
Golf-
stations in the,
if I remember, it was Golf Club and Merrill Avenue were maybe Northwestern. But based on the data showing it, it was 2 that I can appreciate why they were listed as being concerned.
okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Dave, what kind of flows do we get during wet weather from a volume standpoint, compared to your normal flow, average daily flow?
Our average flow is maybe 5.
5.
It's actually decreased a little bit.
Yeah.
I used to have said 5.5. And then peak flows, they can go up where they peg our meters out into the 20 million gallon per day range.
Okay, so we do have an issue.
Yeah, and I think it's been better lately, but I can't quite explain that completely.
Well, we haven't had a particularly wet season.
And one storm can be different than another
Yes.
one too, if the ground's already saturated or if it isn't.
That's
or
correct.
Some things like that might be hard to pick up without paying attention to all those details.
Is it Ryan?
Yes,
You said that the EPA range, or the desirable range, is 2.5 to 4.
correct.
And I noticed that we have 3 of our basins that you monitored here that are over that, 2 that are way over that.
Correct.
And those 2 happen to be older sections of the city.
Correct.
I can recall, because I live in an older section, diverting my roof drains from the sewer system a long time ago. Joe, you were in charge then. Do we still have a lot of that in the city, where the where the roof drains are connected to the sewer system?
That's possible. I mean, that could be a result of why those two red basins had peaking factors of close to 14. The smoke testing follow-up activities would be where you would be able to
Yes.
kind of pinpoint those. So if you were out doing the smoke test, it'd be typical to see smoke coming out of the vent stack of each of the houses.
Right.
But if your roof drain was diverted to the sanitary sewer, your gutter would have smoke coming through it too,
Right.
and then we would document that.
I suspect, just from my walking the neighborhood, I suspect there's still a lot of that out there, particularly the churches across the street, that one in particular.
Uh-oh.
Anyway, let's see, I had one other question, but Eric, it seems like, and we haven't discussed this, but it seems like on new construction, we're requiring stormwater capture, landscaping and structures more and more. That's true, isn't it?
Yes.
And
Yep,
would
is
that
true.
have any impact on this, or is that strictly a stormwater issue?
Yeah, it is. I mean, but, I think the practices that we're doing now prevents, a lot of our runoff from, getting into the sanitary. I know when we reconstructed Second Street in front of the church over there, we found drains going to sanitary from, the roof drains
Right.
and stuff, so those were disconnected. So when we redo streets in the older areas of the city, I'm sure we will find more. So I think you're right, that we still have that. Some we don't know about. And so, but I do think that the more we can control the runoff, the better that will be as far as preventing it from getting into the sanitary.
So a good example might be the new Cloverville Credit Union building with swales around the parking lot?
Correct.
Okay.
And, yeah, and we can kind of, direct where that stormwater flows.
Right.
Yep.
Are there any other questions?
I have one. So how, your recommendation seems to be focusing on infiltration from a manhole and others. How will we get at that issue of what's happening below the ground relative to the conditions of the current sanitary sewer system? And how, do we televise those? How do we address that issue of infiltration through contact with groundwater?
Yeah, so the city currently does, they have an annual televising and cured-in-place pipe rehabilitation program that you guys have been doing, I think, fairly consistently, which is a great way to attack that infiltration. We recommend the manhole side of things to kind of work in conjunction with that cure-in-place pipe program. And also understand that, I didn't mention this in the presentation, but the inflow sources, the roof drains and the vented manhole covers and the things that are associated with the inflow is the lesser expensive of the two sources of II to remove. So being able to locate those infiltration sources is going to come from continuing to televise and rehabilitate the sewers. And you will find some through the manhole assessments if you're opening a manhole cover and if you see water coming through the bottom sections and joints, or if it's a brick sewer or a brick manhole, you might see some signs of infiltration coming through the manhole that could be taken care of at that time as well.
For Eric, then, as we look at the two outliers, if you will, the 13s, how will that drive your capital planning and replacement schedules? Will you be paying a little bit more attention to that going forward as we look at our capital expenditures from the utility and maybe trying to accelerate some projects in those areas to avoid I&I?
Yeah, I think the first step would be to actually put something together to actually do the smoke testing, and identify those locations, and then identify what those costs are going to be depending on, what we found during the smoke test, and then arrange that as a project, I think, in our capital plan, which may come to a higher priority than some other things that we have in there, John. Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Jean?
The comment about the river, I thought about that. Was there a dramatic impact to our drainage system? And I thought, no, there really isn't, but there would be around the wastewater plant, and I think around Bridge Street, there's a creek that comes down. But the majority of the east side is, unless it's the interceptor sewer, it's likely not a factor.
Correct.
But there's two bits of information, and I know, not against you folks from Strand, but, and staff might not even be fully aware of it, but if we could find, and I don't know where it is, I know we had a copy of the plans down at the wastewater plant years and years ago, but when we did the separation back in the late 30s, early 40s, there's a whole bunch of, there might be some carrots there, because I'm starting to think the one on the east side, I know there was at Prospect and McIntosh, there was a diversion. If the sanitary got too high, it would divert into the storm. And there was a chamber there, but I think that, it appears to me that that's been fully removed.
Yeah, we had a meter on Prospect and
Yes.
McIntosh. I think two of them, right, one coming from the measuring flow coming from the north and one coming from the east.
The east. But I think there was another structure to the north. And maybe that's also contributing to why that jumped up there. And I've harped about the one off of First and Forest Street down in the parking lot. I don't think we know much about that one, and I know it's there. But I still think there's another one on the east side, but it'd be nice if we could find that initial set of plans, because it did show those relief outlets, and majority of those have been sealed off in one form or another. But the other thing would be nice, a value, I think, would be to look at the sewer system evaluation study that was done in the late 70s, early 80s. And we have information that how we dealt with all those. And the same thing you're recommending is smoke testing, identified a whole host of things that I think the majority of those have all been resolved.
Okay.
But it would be nice to review that data and then go for it.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry to disappoint you all, but I'm putting this on hold, the PFAS discussion, until April. We'll have some more information then. And I know that that's kind of a hot topic right now. So we're moving on to item number 5, discussion and possible action on the implementation of a rain barrel program citywide. I don't know who wants to start this one.
Well, I'll take it up. Eric and John and I met in person and went over the options that we have. We also had a Zoom call with the village trustee and the public works director at Cottage Grove, Wisconsin, outside of Madison, where they're in the process of installing a rain barrel program. We thought we would just kind of quickly summarize our findings today and I guess seek direction as to what we should do between now and the next meeting. I think it's quite feasible that we could implement a program by this summer, if we choose to do that. We have identified at least a couple of vendors, there may be more, and these vendors are capable of handling essentially most of the program, all of the marketing, all of the billing, all of the collections, payment collections, and the provision of barrels, as well as connecting devices that are required when you hook up a rain barrel to your downspout. Most of the communities that we've talked with or looked at offer some kind of a financial incentive to those who choose to install a rain barrel. That incentive takes a couple of forms. In the case of Cottage Grove, they've actually tapped into a funding source where they're able to reduce the cost to the consumer of the barrel. And in other cases, the incentive takes the form of a rebate on the individual's water bill. If you put in a rain barrel, you get a certain amount of money knocked off your water bill on an annual basis. $25 to $50 is the range that we've seen. The city's responsibility in pretty much all of these programs, if you go ahead with actually providing barrels for your customers, the city's responsibility is to manage some kind of a distribution program. In other words, the barrels come to you on pallets. Citizens who've ordered them pick them up at a certain point, at a certain time, on a certain day. Usually those are Saturday mornings, like from 9 till noon, at a city park or at a city facility. We talked about various places where we could do it here, where you would have automobile access and you could handle it from a COVID-safe, in a COVID-safe way with minimal contact between personnel and customers. So that's basically where we are. We haven't selected any vendor. We haven't adopted any particular program. And I'm not sure we're quite ready yet, Eric, or John, to recommend a program. Please chime in here on anything that I may have missed or misconstrued.
I see Mr. Robinson unmuting himself.
Go ahead, John.
Well, the question is there support for advancing the program? And if there is, what direction would you like to go? The Cottage Grove situation is a pure subsidy, one-time subsidy. And contrast that with the City of Superior and others where they will do an annual rebate on your bill. The easier one to administer is the Cottage Grove approach. But the question is how much money do we, if we do this, how much money will we have? Do we want to apply that toward subsidizing the purchase of it or in the rebate? I think from an ease of administration, to get it going, it might make sense to subsidize the purchase, which might attract more people because the outlay would be less going into it. And again, much easier to administer. And then we're not going out and checking to see if the barrels are actually in use each and every year.
John, if I could add to that, just to provide a little perspective, let's say that the barrel and the connection apparatus costs an individual homeowner $75. And let's say we had 100 customers decide to participate in the program, and let's say that the waterworks utility would provide a $25 subsidy, bringing the cost to the homeowner to $50, and the cost of the utility then in that case would be $2,500. So that might be one way of doing it. I think in Cottage Grove's situation, they had found another source, a foundation, or they had found another source for that money. But in any case, I would doubt, at least on the first go-round, that this would amount to a lot of money. I think it would be rather modest. Agree? Hello? John, do you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
And in addition, it would win us bonus points for our stormwater management practices.
Right.
We like those points.
Yes, we do.
I guess I am in favor of moving in this direction. I'd also be in favor, I'd probably let some of the local foundations know that this is the direction we're going, see if they'd like to participate.
Okay.
But yeah, I like this direction. I think probably it would be better to have that one-time rebate or one-time subsidy, right? Instead of having people walk around and see if these barrels are hooked up. I can't imagine sending people out doing that.
Yeah, okay. Is the board also in favor of us pursuing an arrangement with one of these vendors who is willing, their program is to provide the barrels and the marketing and do the billing and collection all by themselves? And we basically have to handle the
Just cut them a check.
distribution.
Yeah. Oh, and the distribution, okay.
Right. I mean, I think that's where John and Eric and I land on this.
That sounds like a solid direction to me. Do we need to have an official vote on this, or is the direction?
Well, we did have a vote in the last meeting that to go ahead. I guess maybe you want to reaffirm that.
All right, so I guess I would entertain a motion to move forward with this rain barrel program with the city subsidizing the one-time purchase and pushing this committee, this little ad hoc committee, to kind of go ahead and work with the vendor and figure out how to get this done.
Great.
Yeah? Is there a motion?
Well, I'm on the committee. I'm not going to move. You guys, go ahead, Dawn.
A motion by Herbst, second by Jean. All those in favor can signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
We look
Thank-
forward to rain barrels all over Wausau.
Quick question I see Mary Ann is on.
Yes.
Are there any purchasing restrictions that we would have in pursuing a vendor? Or maybe we can do that privately, but just making sure we're following the city's purchasing protocols and other things. So maybe we'll have a separate conversation with Mary Ann on that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. We will follow all the procurement policies. Thank you. Item number 6 on our agenda is discussion and possible action on the purchase of 1010 Bugby Avenue for the purpose of constructing a solar array. I'll get to you, Eric, maybe before we have a
Sure.
motion.
So the purchase agreement, we had a couple edits on that, and I don't think we received that back from Matthew yet. We did go through the environmental phase 1 assessment, and that came back clear with no further action required, so that contingency's been met. We would like to get out there and just make sure that the soils are compatible with what we want to do by digging some test pits, and we can do that in-house. And so that would be the last contingency we have on that purchase agreement with Matthew Construction. So the cost of the property would be $125,000, and once we get through and we determine that that last contingency has been met and is satisfactory to us, we'd like to move forward with setting up the purchase of that property.
I see Mr. Robinson looks, I think he has a
Yeah,
question.
I have a question relative to the phase 1, and I was a little concerned because there was no interview of anybody involved in the previous ownership, which would be normal standard protocol for a phase 1, but do we know they referenced the berms in there? I don't know if they were on property or immediately off property. Were those berms created because of movement of soil, or were they associated with fill? Do we know? Scott, do you know?
The berms that we have moved and the remaining on site were topsoil that were moved off of site just for the recovery of sand underneath.
So you're comfortable that all material that was on the site was from the site historically?
And the berms, we believe that that material was from the site historically. I do also have one staff member that worked for the previous owner, and that is what his thoughts were, historical thoughts were as well, is that material was topsoil that was moved aside for excavation of sand underneath.
Question. If we, for some reason, decide not to pursue the solar array project, what do we do with the property?
We would retain it, we could sell it, we could, the utility be able to manage that, how that they would want to manage that. Yep.
Is that property on the tax rolls now?
It is right now, yes,
So it'll come off?
correct. I think the water department pays a pilot, which is determined by the PSC on an annual basis to the city. So based on the property it owns.
Mr. Robinson?
I would move for, do we need a motion to approve the purchase?
Right, yes.
I would make that motion.
All right, we have a motion to approve the purchase of 1010 Bugby Avenue, second by Jean. Any further discussion on this topic? Okay, we have a question from the audience. Alder Pat Peckham has a question.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if the additional property is needed in order to build an array of a certain size, or why are you buying this? I'm absolutely enthralled with the idea of you're doing it, but I just wondered what it's going to allow the utility to do.
Yeah, so when we've hired Clark Dietz to review the property that the utility owns to the north. The space that we need would be on the very north side of that property. So we had a lot of additional construction costs in order to get those conductors and the additional equipment and stuff back to the treatment facility. And while we were doing that and looking at different options on the very north side, Matthew Construction approached us as they were getting ready to put this property up on the market. And so we had Clark Dietz do an analysis on this property to see what we could do. So this is obviously much closer to the treatment facility as far as conductors and bringing the power to the treatment facility. And I also think it's property too that will help out with our wellhead protection plan that we'll be moving forward with as well for protection of our wells up in that area as well. But I do think that this is about a 7-acre piece of property, and we may need a little bit more property to the north to get to the size that we want. But we'll look at those varying sizes to provide enough power for the treatment facility once it's up and running. So we are planning to bring Clark Dietz back with some options and alternatives and paybacks, as well as really what size and space that we're going to need. If we're going to look at a 40% power generation, a 60%, or a 90% of what the plant is using to offset grid power. So, I don't know, does that answer your question, Pat?
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, all of those in favor of approving the purchase of 1010 Bugby Avenue can signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously, thank you. The last item on our agenda is to adjourn. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.